Okay, so welcome again to these Empty Meadow sessions. This week we're going to be talking about the three doors of liberation, the second part of the sitting meditation. So it's not something we particularly uh, practice in the group meditation that we do on Saturday mornings, but I think it is quite helpful uh, to have a look at the three doors. I guess the reason why is once you feel stable in awareness of self, bringing your mindfulness to self, uh, it does begin to ask the question, well, can I be mindful of other things? In the Saturday morning meetings, after sitting meditation, we practice walking meditation. And part of walking meditation is about being mindful while we're moving with our eyes open and being mindful in the real world. The Plum Village tradition and Thai's emphasis is very strongly on bringing mindfulness to your everyday life. And although meditation is a helpful tool, it is just a tool. And unless you can bring the mindfulness that's cultivated during sitting meditation to the rest of your life, you're really, it's like buying a brand new shiny drill and then leaving it in the box and then trying to make a hole with a nail and I don't know, something that's very inefficient at making holes. So the reason that you're cultivating this tool, the reason that you're trying to develop this mindfulness practice is so that you can bring it into everyday life. And the emphasis is very much on that. I think, I mean, and Thai's interpretation really is that the original Buddhist concept of awakening, uh, the word Buddha means the awakened one, and that the awakening is not an awakening during meditation. One doesn't become enlightened during meditation. It's as you sit up from meditation and leave and go into the rest of your life. That's where you need to be awake. So that's really where the emphasis really is kind of placed. So so let's sort of start the presentation. So we'll do that, and I'll ask a few questions to the group as well, so that we can just check some understanding. And then we're going to practice a sitting meditation with these three extra steps at the end. Okay, so I'll take it as read that we understand the first parts of awareness of self. So the three doors of liberation, that phrase is Thai's phrase, and it is the original sutra, the full awareness of breathing, describes four kind of buckets. The first one is body, then feelings, then mind. So they're the awareness of self. And then the fourth bucket is awareness of other things. So that question arises, what about other stuff? So other people in our lives, or pets, games and hobbies, the whole world, material things around us, even pictures, art, songs. There are so many things, as it were, in the world. How can we bring our awareness to those things? So this is a sort of description of how to do that. So the three doors themselves are emptiness, signlessness, and aimlessness. And I'll define them one at a time. So emptiness is the first one. So a lot of the time in people talking about mindfulness and meditation, people often say what meditation is not or mindfulness is not. So I'll start my definition in the same vein by saying emptiness is not nothing. I think last time we talked about this, we were sort of referring to the fact that conventionally, I guess, the word empty does mean nothing. So if you say my glass is empty, you mean that there's a void inside my glass. It contains nothing. So this definition of or my definition here of this word is different from maybe its conventional meaning. So it doesn't mean nothing or a void, and it's not nihilism, which is a kind of philosophical point of view that nothing exists, nothing is real. So it's not advocating that nothing is real, but it does say that all things, so all of those things we had in the previous slide, and just for convention's sake, and because the translation sticks to this word, I'm going to use the word dharma, meaning things. So all things do not have an independent self. So what does that mean? Well, they all arise from different conditions. So say, for example, if I take myself as a thing, I am dependent upon conditions. So that the obvious conditions to my physical form are that I am the child of my mother and my father. So we all have parents, and we are literally physical manifestations of their DNA that's kind of come together, mixed up a bit, and then made us who we are. So the information that makes me comes from my mum and dad, but the actual physical form of me doesn't. That comes from the food that I ate, the way I looked after myself while I was developing, and if I may have any injuries or scars or things like that, that's due to the life that I led up until this point. And that's just my physical form. If you think about my emotional life or my mental state, to some extent, that's dependent on my genetics, but also dependent on the way my mother and father brought me up. But then after I left their realm of influence, as it were, the rest of my life influenced myself. So who I am is a result of many conditions. And so I am not independent, and that, I guess, is the key word here, of those conditions. I am dependent on those conditions. And each of those conditions, so like my mother and father, for example, they have similar preconditions. And so none of these things, none of these dharmas are independent of the preconditions. So they don't exist absolutely independently, and similarly, they don't not exist. And that's why sometimes Buddhism is called the middle way, or a non-dualistic, so neither subjective nor objective point of view, somewhere in the middle. And that's why it's often called the middle way. So I'll kind of just throw it out to the room. We've talked about this before a few days ago as well. So has anyone kind of got any thoughts about that word emptiness, or any reflections that they've had since we spoke last? No. Okay. So I'll move on. Okay. So this is my example. So we'll work through this example. So I'm going to take a seed, a flower seed, and I'm going to plant it in the soil. So I add a few conditions. So I've got the physical form, that seed, remembering that seed came from somewhere, and I'll leave that in as a kind of question mark. Where did that seed come from? I put it in the soil, so the soil is a condition, and I water it and I keep it warm, so I add some conditions. It begins to grow. First the shoot, a few leaves, add some more conditions, so more heat, more water. 2, 3, 4 leaves, develops a bud, and it turns into a flower. So we can see that this flower as a thing was made up of the conditions that led to the flower arising. Seed, soil, leaves, etc. So physical stuff, that's kind of obvious. A bit like the body is obvious when we consider self. We think, okay, I'm definitely sitting in my body. I can see it, I feel it, it's definitely there. So when we consider emptiness, thinking about the physical conditions are easy, so easier, or the easiest maybe. And then there's some additional stuff. So maybe this is like feelings. So there's stuff that's physical, but not of the flower. So the rain obviously comes from its water. It comes from the clouds and the water cycle. The sun is a big star in the middle of the universe. No, it's not. In the middle of the solar system, it's kicking out buckets of energy due to fusion reactions. So there's a whole thought about what the sun is, but its energy is landing on the Earth. But it's a real thing. And there's carbon dioxide that the plant is taking in, photosynthesizing and building its own sugars and proteins that it uses to make its leaves and the flowers. So the gas that it lives in has been transformed into leaves and flowers. And then there's even more abstract things. So am I in the plant? That sounds a bit kind of fanciful and not realistic, but in a way I am, because I planted the seed. So if the condition of me wasn't in the seed's kind of life history story, it would not have manifested as a flower. And in exactly the same way as my previous example, each condition has its own set of conditions. So we've already described that I have a whole myriad of conditions: physical, sort of paraphysical, and then more ethereal, I guess. And just emphasize that nothing exists absolutely on its own as an independent thing. It's always dependent on preconditions. So the gatha that we add to the end of the meditation is I'm aware of the Dharma, the flower, and the flower is empty. And during that, our awareness comes to the flower and then moves deeper. So Ty describes it as looking deeply, and I'll use that phrase recurrently. So we look deeply into the flower. We see past its superficial nature into the preconditions that caused it. So we allow our awareness to look past the superficial boundaries of the flower, deeper into it, into its nature. Okay, so today I'm more going to focus on signlessness. So, and hopefully describe this in a little bit more detail because I skimmed over it before. So, if we've got this definition of emptiness kind of solid in our heads, and we've practiced looking deeply at an object and past its obvious nature into its deeper nature, what does signlessness mean? Well, as we go from object to object, considering the preconditions, it's not long before we think, hang on a minute. For example, if we think of three objects in my garden, or your garden, it's likely that you or me, depending on whose garden it is going to be one of those preconditions. So in the earlier one, I was in the flower because I planted the seed, but I don't know, the bench that's next to the flower bed, I bought that and stuck it there and varnished it. So I'm part of the bench as well. So the preconditions, the conditions that make up the objects around us, have shared preconditions. And so objects interrelate with each other in this nature. Ty's phrase is where there is perception, there is deception. And what he means is if we perceive a flower as only a flower, then that is deception. It's more than a flower. It's bigger than a flower. So I think I go on here just to say what I've just said. So yeah, so some of the conditions are going to be shared. That's kind of what I'm saying in this slide. So I've already kind of said that. So here's my worked example. So we've got the flower that we found was empty earlier. And now I'm going to add me on top of the flower. And as I'm looking at the flower, I'm breathing in and out. breathing in oxygen and out carbon dioxide. And we know from our early example that one of the conditions for the flower was carbon dioxide. I made a point of telling you that photosynthesis is the absorption of carbon dioxide and the synthesis of sugars and proteins that physically give the flower its leaves and petals. And we can see that some of what makes this flower was me before, because I made the carbon dioxide. You could think of it like which bit of me do I own? Do I own my out breath? Is that physically me going out into the environment? And when does it stop being me? When it goes into the flower? And that's why this concept of signlessness, that things can't have an absolute boundary, becomes apparent. So there isn't an obvious point at which my breath, out breath, stops being mine, as in I own it, in inverted commas, part of my body. And at some point, as it goes into the flower, what point does it become the flower? Well, you could say, well, I don't know, 10 centimeters past my lips, it's 90% mine and 10% the flower. It doesn't make any sense. So, and it's not necessarily this flower that's going to absorb that carbon dioxide. It could be the person I'm sitting next to is going to breathe it in. And so does it become their carbon dioxide as it enters their body? So if you think about it, the boundaries are blurred. They're not so blurred that you can't make out that that's a flower and that's me, but they're not so sharp. And that's really the concept that signlessness is trying to get you to take on board. So yeah, so literally, I am in the flower, literally, rather than, so it's not sort of some supernatural thing. My form that physically made my body is now left my body and gone into someone else's body. And it doesn't stop there. Some of the oxygen, yes. So this is kind of saying the same thing. And there are other shared preconditions. So we said earlier that I planted the seed. So I gave rise to the fact that the flower is in the soil that it's growing in at the moment, because I selected that location. And so as we look deeply between me and my Dharma, my flower, there is not an absolute boundary. It's not to say that we're all just some big sort of homogeneous mass of stuff, although you could start to think of the world like that. And as you look very deeply, boundaries do become very blurred. But so we can sense, it's not that we can stop talking to each other and saying there's a flower over there, go and smell it, but and not understand what that means. So the conventional kind of way of looking at the world is still valid, but looking at the world in this deeper way, we start to see this interconnectivity between us and the environment around us. And as we reflect on that, we notice that we don't hold on so much to concepts of self, of the flower. And that's helpful in our meditation because the world is always transforming, just like my body's sugars are turning into carbon dioxide, I'm breathing them out, I'm transforming. You probably have heard the sort of urban myth that 90% of your body that you're sitting in right now wasn't those atoms and molecules that make up your body. They weren't your body 3 months ago. Most of your body has regenerated and you've turned it into waste matter and it's exited your body, and you've ingested more food, and that has built this new body that you find yourself sitting in. So well over half, anyway, of the material that you're sitting in right now wasn't in your body 3 months ago. So, and that's not a myth. That's or some sort of fanciful notion. That is true. So, where are you going to be in 3 months' time? Where are we all going to be in 3 months' time? Well, at least half of you won't be sitting on that chair. So where did you go? Where did that bit of you go? And what will make up you in 3 months' time? Something else. So the Gata is, I'm aware of myself and my Dharma, so the flower. There is no boundary, or whatever. This also is kind of the time at which I'm happy, more than happy, for people to let go of kind of prescriptive phrases. Although when I lead a guided meditation, obviously I have to say something. So, but you can now start to think with your own definitions, because words mean different things to different people. So start to craft your own Gata. So what do I understand by what Ben just said? How would I phrase it? And so as you do your own meditation privately on your own, use your own phrases, and that's true for the entire sitting meditation. Use your own concepts and phrases. It's tailored to yourself, because your meditation is yours. It's not something that you have to follow in a prescriptive way. And later, maybe next week, we can discuss silent meditation. So you move beyond saying things in inverted commas to yourself, and just bringing your awareness to things, not necessarily reciting phrases like mantras in your head. You just bring your awareness to that thing, and then hold your awareness on that thing until the next step. Then you move your awareness to something else. So the Gata is, I'm aware of myself and the flower, and there is no boundary or border or whatever. Okay, and then the final concept, the final door, is the door of aimlessness. So again, aimlessness has a kind of conventional sense, which kind of, I suppose, means lazy or pointless, or it's not a very good word. It's a bit like emptiness is quite a negative word. So this is a redefinition of the word aimless. So this is forget, as it were, or try to forget that kind of conventional sense of aimless being idle and lazy. And this is a new definition. And what time means in this translation is I have nowhere to go. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm already here. I have arrived. There's a sense in awakening. There's two in my mind. There's two kind of core principles within the Buddhist scripture. The first is don't attach to anything. Don't think anything is yours. And the second is be aware of the present moment. Your awareness should primarily be focused on the present moment. And that's captured within this step. So aimless being, I have no aim. I'm not going anywhere. I'm already here. I've already arrived in this moment. Ty describes, don't put things in front of yourself and run after it. Realize that you're already there. You already have what you need. Maybe not, in the words of the Rolling Stones, it may be not what you want, but it is what you need. So, and just to kind of bring Mick Jagger into it again, that idea of not what I want, but what I have. Accept what I have, not what I want. That want is an attachment to an idea that is not real. And it's the same as monsters under the bed. It's not real. So why are you attaching to something that's not real? Instead, accept where you are. Having done that, you can then think, okay, if I'm not over the moon about where I am, and I want to move to somewhere else, or I want to suffer less, or the people around me to suffer less, I'll change my behavior in the present moment in order to suffer less in the present moment, rather than setting a kind of target and then trying to move towards that target. It's a slightly different emphasis on changing your behavior in the present moment in order to experience it in the present moment. much more likely to succeed, I think. And so, but the aimlessness now, when we're thinking about a dharma, about an object outside of ourselves, is to realize that the conditions have manifested themselves just like a flower blooming at this particular moment. So a flower is a great example because in the past, flowers were buds, and before that, they were seedlings and seeds in the ground, and we couldn't even see them. And we know, all of us, hopefully, I know one of you is a very keen gardener, so, but most of us know that flowers are transient, that they bloom, which is wonderful, like a firework, but then they fade, and then we cut them and we take them to a place in our garden that we put all the cut flowers, and eventually over time they decompose into mud. And if we're a good gardener, we might dig that mud up and put it back on the flower bed that contained the plant that made the flower in the first place, because we know the nutrients from that compost will nourish future generations of flowers. So you could say, well, that compost is a flower and a seed, and me, I'm in the compost. And when I pick it up and stick it back on the rose beds, the flower itself is going back into, and the cycle is kind of beginning again. It's like a physical cycle, I guess. And being aware that the flower and me manifesting in this particular moment is the key part of me apprehending that flower, because it's not a seed anymore and it's not compost yet. It's a flower, and that's a miracle. That's amazing that me and the flower are in this present moment. And it's kind of like an awakening in itself, that realization that there is no moment where me and this flower exists other than this moment. Previously it was a seed, and later it's going to be mud. But at the moment it's just me and this flower, and isn't that great? And a consideration that all these preconditions, which some of which are shared, have materialized in this moment. And that is, as I say, an awakening. It requires a quiet mind, a settled mind, to reach this clarity of insight, I think, because if we're distracted by, oh God, that flower reminds me of X, Y, and Z, and we start thinking, or that flower makes me sad or happy or whatever, and we haven't settled our feelings. If we're being tossed around by competing aspects of our lives, if we haven't quietened ourselves, very difficult to get these insights. And that's why the three doors, or these last three steps, are an appendix on the end of awareness of self and settling of self. It's almost then awareness of the environment, and then deep looking, deep awareness of the environment and the object. And I just worked through the example really quickly. I think it basically just says what I've just said, that our experience can only be in the present moment. Our memory is patchy and inaccurate. Our prediction of the future is wildly inaccurate and complete speculation. How often have you spent enormous amounts of energy worrying about the future, and that future did not manifest? And it wasn't anything to do with your actions that caused it not to manifest. And how many times have bad things happened to you that you did not expect to happen? And so you should have been worrying about them, but instead you're worrying about something that didn't happen. So worrying about the future is pointless. Predicting the future is completely inaccurate. So awareness that we are just in this present moment, if only for these 20 minutes, you can go back to wasting your energy on prediction in the rest of your life. But during the sitting meditation, try to bring your awareness to what is real. And this concept of temporal connectiveness, we're connected in time, me and the object, makes it feel much more clear, much more real to you as you practice it. So my suggestion for a getter is I'm aware of myself and the flower we have arrived in this moment. Arriving is a really good, I think, translation. It's not mine, it's Ty's, but I often think of that sensation that you get when you've been on a long journey and you finally, in a car, I'm driving a long, long way and tired of driving, motorways, all that stuff. We finally get to where we are and you have that sense of, oh, thank God I'm here. And the car stops, you put the handbrake on, oh, I'm here. And you notice that the passenger, the object that you've been meditating on, is also here with you. Me and you, we did that, and we're here now in this moment. And there's an element, say you're going to a party, there's an element of just before you start thinking, oh, I've got to get out and do all my party stuff, of just being happy that you've arrived, you've done it, and you've got to this place. So sometimes I think of that feeling when I'm come to this step. I don't even really use these phrases that arrived in this gatha. I more just bring my awareness to that feeling of, I'm here with my buddy sitting next to me. So whatever the object is in the passenger seat. So that's maybe a tip, I guess, of try to think of this idea of arriving in the present moment, because it brings up you're not spending energy thinking about the past, but it does acknowledge that the past has happened. Otherwise, we wouldn't be arriving. And we've arrived somewhere, so the future is going to happen. It's going to happen in front of us, but we haven't got out the car into the party yet. So we're not in the future either. We're just in arrival. And moment to moment, that's all we do. We just keep arriving in the next present moment. And that is really our only experience. We have memories of the journey that we've been on. But if you tried to remember every single turning and road sign, you wouldn't be able to. Unless you've done the journey many times, it'd be very difficult to describe to someone how you got here. But you did get here, and you definitely are here, and you haven't got out the car, and you're not going into the party yet. So the future hasn't happened either, and anything could happen out there. Could be a fancy dress party, and we haven't got a costume. So any numbers of good or bad things could happen in the party. We haven't got there. We're just, thank God, we're here. And then the next moment will be the same, and the next, and the next. And that is awakening. Oh, that I think is true awakening. And it's not actually that difficult to achieve. It's happened many times to me where I've been meditating and not meditating, and I'm sure it will to you. A realization that you're in the present moment, and a clarity of understanding of the present moment. So awakening or enlightenment, they're interchangeable in my mind. They're accessible to everyone all the time. Trying to maintain your awareness in this more awakened state is tricky. And certainly I wouldn't pretend that I can maintain it for any length of time, but trying to is the practice. Trying to remain in this aware, fully awakened state. I think I'm just working through this is the epilogue. Yeah. So the other thing in a formal setting meditation is that you can get to a point where those gathas are over, or you feel like you've done the aimlessness bit, you've done the arriving. You can sit just for a few breaths before you get out the car and go into the party in that sense of arriving. You can hold on to it just for a few seconds, a few more breaths. And so we can return to our breathing. And sometimes I think of we are breathing in and out. Me and my passenger are breathing in and out. And realize your connection and hold that awareness of the present moment for longer than a split second or one breath. Keep going with it and try to hold it. And as you do, insights will begin to arrive. In exactly the same way as for the rest of the meditation, thinking can also interrupt you, and feelings and all the other things that can knock you off your perch, as it were. They will also happen in this at the same frequency as they've been happening the whole meditation. But just as you've been able to hold your awareness on body, for example, back when you were doing that, you can stay here and just hold this awareness and breathe with your Dharma and realize your connection to it, and new insight may be arriving. At the very least, it's just an enjoyable 20 minutes. And then here's just an idea that obviously objects are not all flowers, so any object, living or non-living, could be considered. Think about people in your life, people that you love, and we'll do that in a minute. People that you love, people that you don't like very much, you can meditate on them, because understanding their preconditions may give you insight. Understanding why people that you don't like are behaving like that can help you develop compassion for them and see them in a different light, and ultimately you suffer less. That's what this is all about. Other objects, your emotions, art, songs, the list goes on and on. For some reason they all flash. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the presentation. I know this is the second time we've done this, but is there any comments now on any of those steps or any reflections there?
I was thinking about the fact. Oh, go on, Kim.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Yesterday when we did the meditation and we included sort of the connection with the tree, I found that amazing because I think I agreed with Malcolm when he said that the focus suddenly went from just sort of right in my head and immediately around me to a bigger space. And that was really amazing, actually.
An awareness of a bigger space between this connection between you and this great big tree that's outside your house, and how much bigger the world seems. So absolutely, that's a great insight. And it feels great. Yeah, it does feel lovely, and it's one of those things where words let you down. Lovely doesn't quite capture it because it was so lovely. You could underline it and put it in bold, but it still doesn't capture it. So one of those things that the practice must be practiced. It's not a theoretical exercise, and but that's an example of an insight that I was aware of the space between me and a tree and how big a tree is in comparison to my little body. All those sort of insights have become real. And then as you move on, I don't know, we all did a meditation about a tree outside our window last time. I don't know how many of you since then have glanced up at that tree and thought, I know something about you. I've got your number. So, a kind of a different awareness, a different aspect.
Yeah, when I was struggling last night actually to meditate, the tree just popped into my head, and it was quite grounding actually to just sort of connect to that, even though I was struggling to kind of connect to myself.
That's interesting. So
I liked your point about sort of aimlessness. I think, as it was you mentioned, as sort of almost the pointlessness on speculating on things into the future, as they often don't turn out. And how you look upon the future often depends on how you feel at the moment, whether you're looking at it positively or negatively, or fluctuating somewhere in between.
Sure. And there's a different sutra called The Better Way of Living Alone, which we can talk about another time, but which kind of makes it very clear that this idea of the inaccuracy of your ability to see the future, wildly inaccurate, and as you say, completely coloured by whether you're in a pessimistic mood or an optimistic mood. And if you were to stand outside of yourself and hear yourself, as it were, predicting the future and think, well, you're bound to say that because you're in a good mood, or you're bound to say that because you're in a glum mood. It's your mood, can't you see? And yet we don't. We look at the future and we think, oh, it's definitely going to be awful, or it's definitely, that will work out. And we fool ourselves into thinking that we're much better at predicting the future than we are. We sort of, I guess, our survival instinct prompts us to try to predict the future because we don't want bad things to happen in the future. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we do spend a disproportionate amount of energy and time on that task rather than paying attention to what truly is happening. And that's kind of, this kind of return to the present moment, and then look much more deeply at the present moment, because you can do something about it. And if you're suffering now, or if the object of your meditation is your friend or your family member or your pet, and they suffer, and you can see that, then you can think to yourself, I'm going to do something. You feel motivated to do something about it, and you might even have an insight of what you could do to help them, that's not about looking off into the distance, but looking at the present moment. You're far more likely to make a useful contribution if you've got all the information. And so, we're trying to build up that information as the meditation goes on. Great. Okay, well, thank you for those comments and reflections. Okay, so we're just going to spend the next 20 minutes, as I've said. We'll do the full meditation now, including a meditation on an object. So last time we looked out the window at a tree, I noticed someone's got a bit of traffic noise going on in the background. Thank you for that. So I mean that genuinely. And I think it is useful to have a crack in the window, as it were, so that you can feel connected to the outside world. But this time, I'd like you to think of a loved one. It could be anyone in your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person, so you could love your pet, or your dog, or your cat. It could be someone who is no longer with us, who's no longer alive. So their presence can still be manifesting in the world. So we're trying to think of that if we are thinking about someone who's no longer with us. Or, as I say, a loved one, where they might be at the moment, even though they're not right in front of you, you can still bring your awareness to them. In the same way that when we do the sitting meditation, now that we're in the virtual room, I reflected on Saturday that I get a very strong sense that I'm with you when we do that group meditation. And I think that was a shared experience. So in just the same way as you feel that you're in a circle, even though you're sitting with your headset looking at a computer, you feel that you're in a circle with other people meditating. Now bring into that awareness field this loved one. And it's a personal thing, so the loved one can be whoever you wish it to be. So we'll do a meditation on a loved one as the final 3 steps in a sitting meditation. Okay, so we'll begin now. So if you just do the normal preparation stuff and just shuffle a bit forward so that you're sitting upright with your back nice and straight, and I'll just invite the bell. Okay, so we start in the normal way, keeping our eyes still and taking some big deep breaths. In through your nose and out through your mouth. Try and make a commitment to this meditation in the next 20 minutes. Put down the thoughts and feelings and really promise yourself that you're going to give this one a go. Big breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. With the next out breath, close your eyes and become aware of how your body feels generally. Not like it did on Monday, yesterday, but right now. Feeling your feet on the ground, aware of the weight of your body on the chair, your hands in your lap. Notice the sounds and sensations around you, but allow them to come and go. Be aware of your connection to the world around you. Bring your awareness back to your body. Notice how your body feels right now. And start at the top of your head. Slowly scan down through your body from head to toe. Start to notice your breathing. Follow each in-breath, each out-breath. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. breathing in naturally and breathing out softly. Natural, soft. Breathing in, I'm aware of my whole body. Breathing out, my body is still. Aware of my body is still. Breathing in, I'm aware of my feelings. Breathing out, my feelings are peaceful. Aware of my feelings are peaceful. Breathing in, I am alive. Breathing out, I am free. Alive, free. Breathing in, I am aware of my mind. Breathing out, my mind is calm. Mind, calm. Breathing in, I am meditating. Breathing out, I am content. Meditating, content. Breathing in, I am aware of my loved one. Breathing out, my loved one is empty. Aware of my loved one. My loved one is empty. Breathing in, my loved one and I. Breathing out, there are no boundaries. My loved one and I, there are no boundaries. my loved one and I, we have arrived. Let go of the focus on your breathing. Look out and be completely free. Bring your awareness back to your body, back to the space around you. Become aware of those different points of contact, the weight of your body on the chair, the feeling of your feet touching the ground. And then, in your own time, gently open your eyes. You just take a second just to reflect on that meditation. It's quite a private one, so I'm not going to ask you to necessarily talk about any of the details, because obviously your relationship with that specific person is a very private experience. But can you, are there any more kind of general comments about how the meditation went?
One thing that I do notice when I do meditation, not just this one, but generally, is that my breathing really, really slows down.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel that sense that we've been talking about today, this sort of interconnection with everything and everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It also helps in giving a sense of freedom in some way.
We're often bound by ignorance and misperception. Returning to the present moment and looking clearly at it and at the object does. Not only do we try to cultivate freedom in the feelings kind of bucket, but also there is a sense of both interconnection, but in a very positive way. Rather than being chained to the world around us, we are in the world around us. and we're not manacled to it, but a present participant in it, and that can be a very nourishing kind of positive feeling.
Yes, I do feel that.
Any other kind of thoughts or reflections on?
I struggled with the, I was doing quite well actually, my thinking was thinking a lot about it. But once you get to the emptiness bit, I overthought it, and my thinking thrown stuff in because I was saying, no, don't think empty, think.
And it's tricky. It's tricky, not to overthink it. And to what extent can you be aware of preconditions without thinking, oh, I better think of 10 at least, setting yourself a task and then trying to complete that task by thinking about it. So there is a subtle difference there. In a way, that's a positive statement because it means that you're aware that your thinking came along. You're aware that there's a difference between being aware of something and thinking about it. So they're both very positive kind of steps, I guess, for developing your practice. And just like I'm glad that you've found some familiarity with letting go of thinking in the first few steps. That's probably because you've done the sitting meditation a couple of times now, up until these last 3 steps. And you're familiar with the feeling of bringing your awareness to that aspect of self and keeping it on that without thinking about it. In the same way, I'm just reminding you of the swimming analogy about kicking and paddling. This maybe is like learning butterfly. It's a more complicated stroke. It requires more coordination and rhythm and practice, but it will come with practice in the same way. So I'd encourage you to, if you feel confident in self, or at least you feel like you've got somewhere with awareness of self, this is a good next step, I guess, both because it can have a myriad of things that you can focus on. It might be helpful if you're first doing it for the next few days to pick an object, even if it's the tree or that we did on Monday, or some object that you want to be connected to in your life, and allow the thinking to kind of go ahead in the rest of the day, so that when you come to sit next and meditate upon that object, you've kind of done the thinking and you've got a good list, like a shopping list, and then you go shopping. You've built the list up by going around your life, and just things pop into your head and you think, oh yeah, put that on the list. And then when you sit, think, okay, I've got my list, I'm good. I find it difficult as well not to, at the beginning of this meditation, when I first started doing it, and I still do when I'm meditating on a thing, is to think, what's the thing this time? Don't forget the thing. By the time we get to the end, I hope I haven't forgotten the thing, and I worry about whether I'm going to remember it or have my shopping list with me, and I suppose that's fear and self-doubt. But when that happens, I think, that's fear and self-doubt. I don't try to recite the shopping list. I just notice that I'm anxious, and then as I notice I'm anxious, my anxiety transforms and calms down, and then I carry on focusing on whatever I'm supposed to be focusing on in that particular part of the meditation. So, that's my reflection, and I guess that's what I struggled with. But yeah, I can totally see how thinking can kind of, I guess it's sort of putting its hand up and saying, I can help you with this. I can do this bit. Please let me. I want your attention again. Just like the 5-year-old child, it thinks it's another way of getting your attention. So it will put its hand up and start jumping around. So it's trickier. Yeah.
I like the idea of the shopping list.
Yeah, yeah. And if you pick a defined target and say I don't know, I'm sitting at my desk and I can see a pen in front of me, so I'm gonna meditate about this pen today, tomorrow, and the next day, and just say that's it. So I don't have to worry about choosing something off the menu or whatever. I'm just gonna do the pen. So get that out of the way, make your decision, keep it as simple as possible, really, and then just allow your thinking, your subconscious, to develop the shopping list between now and tomorrow when I sit. And when I sit, I'm going to sit in my... It's helpful as well to sit in the same place when you sit, so that you don't... The thing that you're looking at the beginning is consistent. And then have your object either physically in front of you or keep the same object, so that there's no decisions or analysis going on. You know what you're doing. You feel confident with it. And then at the end of the meditation, you can notice, how was it different meditating on my pen today compared to yesterday? Did I have a different insight? Was I able to think less or whatever? So reflect in those few breaths just after you open your eyes. Just reflect, how was that compared to yesterday? And notice those sorts of things. I also, think that maybe doing 3 in a row, you'll get much more confident in those steps. Okay, so I'm just going to turn the